Good morning, Paul and Raga. It's the 31st of October, and today we are doing an internal brief on de-dollarization and its implications for Western businesses. We may release this brief to clients if it is helpful. The focus of the discussion is to critically examine the possible future challenges for Western businesses vis-a-vis a changing global order characterized by multipolarity and the declining paramountcy of the US dollar. Over to you, Paul, for any comments.
Well, I thought you were briefing me, mate, but look, let me just lay a bit of context before you continue to sort of brief us. I think it's very interesting to note that a couple of geopolitical issues are continuing to evolve, and they're very interesting in the historical trend. That is, over the last, 30, 40 years at least, America has had the privilege of being a unipole. So it's actually very much been in an extremely dominant position over the other powers. That's presented enormous opportunities for America to progress competitive advantage, particularly in technology, but in a lot of other fields as well, and project their power, whereby a lot of countries want to be under their security umbrella. Issues obviously coming to the fore now, because if you're a power or potential power, you want to act in a manner that means you don't, of course, put yourselves in a position where you get bullied by other powers and you get a greater chance to fulfill your ambitions because you're in a position of power. America's sort of got itself into an interesting bind because, particularly in the last 20, 30 years, its levels of government, governance, its capability, its geopolitical understanding has really not matched governments that it had prior to that period. The neocons, more specifically the US neocons, have particularly got very much empowered and enthralled upon their own Gatorade, and very much got involved in many issues they don't fully understand, made decisions they don't fully understand that impact others. And so they've certainly lost their position as a respected ombudsman and a respected fair player that has the good of all and the good of the globe at the forefront of their thoughts. So what has, of course, occurred is they wanted to go out there and push social capitalistic democracies, and they got to the point where, from the 70s, they encouraged China to grow, and they had this flawed belief that if China grew, they're, of course, going to be able to get wealthier, and then, of course, they'd want to queue up and be like America, because everyone wants to be like America, right? So the Chinese will just suddenly wake up one morning and go, oh, the errors of our way, a couple of thousand years with a different governance system. We'd like to be more like a democratic socialist, capitalistic society with democratic values and abide to the world order. Well, the world order and the rules of that international order have been increasingly set by America, policed by America, and favor America. What, of course, has happened then is America pivoted and went, oh, China's become a threat. I didn't actually see them coming up as a bigger economy than us, which they already are and have been for a couple of years now on a purchasing power parity basis. They're also going to be larger on a pure US dollar basis within a few years. They've got internal challenges, but America saw them as a threat. So started to drive them away. They have then started a war with the Ukraine and Russia, which, of course, only somebody that hasn't read or is so biased that one eye is not only closed but perpetually taken out. The history is there in the books, in the Minsk agreements, in the inability of the West to listen to Putin, the warnings by Sikorsky and by Merkel, and in writing by by Putin. So what America has inadvertently done is force China and Russia to be closer to each other. America's got themselves busy in the Ukraine, Russia, and now in chucking resources not only into the Ukraine and Russia, but also now chucking resources into Israel, Syria, Iraq. So they've got a lot of drains on their resources, which obviously suits China because they can continue to grow their economy, sort out their internal economic issues. Xi's working on his power base. So the big winner of several issues arising from the Ukraine-Russia war is China's able to use the time effectively to establish its power and its stability. America's getting drained but wanting to get involved in more and more issues. But what you're alluding to is the big spin-off. Countries are starting to trade, and you can give some examples to me, but they're starting to do major resource contracts across the border. They're not wanting to be subordinated to pumping everything through US dollars through the SWIFT system, or actually just not wanting America to have hidden controls and visuals on everybody else's economic business. So you've got the growth of BRICS, the growth of bilateral trade deals. Now, this is a major impact for businesses because ultimately there's going to be severe loss of control by America. Make no bones about it. My personal view is America's going to be the economic go-to, safe currency, safe house for the next decade. But what people have to realise is at some point they're not going to be the major economy on their own. They're not going to be the major go-to currency. These will start to change a decade out from now. So look, that's a bit of an overview for you. That presents a whole heap of complexities, particularly in the resource sector, but in other sectors. But I'd like to hear your views, Ramu and Raghu.
Thank you, Paul, for those comprehensive analysis of the entire picture. In this context, like you said, countries spearheaded by China and Russia, and also led by India and Iran, for that matter, are creating alternative payment systems to reduce dollar dependency. And the Western sanctions on Russia post the invasion of Ukraine have accelerated these efforts. China in particular has been vocal in challenging the dollar's dominance. The deteriorating US-China ties have prompted China to leverage the BRICS grouping, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa grouping, to counter at least the geo-economic prevalence of the US dollar. And Russia in particular hopes BRICS can advance the cause of de-dollarization. The rise of the Chinese yuan in Russia deepens China-Russia ties. Raga, if you have any comments, please feel free to pitch in.
Sure, Ramu. So, we're looking at a large geopolitical shift towards a multipolar world order. And a lot of Paul's comments also follow on how, America is no longer the dominant superpower. We do see the rise of China, and increasingly there is an anti-Western coalition that's forming between China, Russia, Iran, who are wary of sanctions that can be used against them in particular situations of war that we saw in the Ukraine-Russia instance. And the entire financial system is designed in such a way that it seems to benefit certain Western countries. Now, these countries, the anti-Western coalition, so to speak, they seem to be looking at an alternative way of countering the dollar hegemony, as we call it. And part of that is the efforts towards de-dollarization and the rising use of yuan. And the yuan is increasingly being used in trade of oil settlements between Saudi Arabia and China. We're seeing Brazil, Argentina even discussing the reduction of dollar dependence. And with the BRICS grouping, these are pretty big economies we're talking about who are largely on board with the idea that alternative currencies need to be explored upon. They haven't exactly narrowed in on the UN only because we have India, which is a bit wary of the creeping Chinese influence, but a lot of countries seem to at least agree on the idea that the dollar hegemony needs to be countered on. So, we are seeing a rising trend towards the increasing use of the yuan in the global markets.
Thank you,
Raga,
Raga. Yeah, Paul,
Ramu,
please.
can I just jump in there? Look, I think it's very interesting that, being very frank, the world really does need a responsible global superpower, and America's values are certainly more congenial with human rights. I think America's lack of a clear, inspiring leader, and that applies to the red and the blue powers in America, but the overstatement of powers by the State Department, the ineptitude of a lot of their analysis, and there's smoke screens on, sending missiles in Syria in the name of defense whilst pretending to encourage peace in Israel and Gaza Strip. I mean, the hypocrisies have become so evident that despite China's obvious problems, people are starting to see through the propaganda, okay? The Belt and Road Initiative, obviously it's China's expansion to war. Well, Russia wasn't going to attack Ukraine if the Western world took some very real threats on board. I mean, this isn't me talking. This is the Steve Waltz, the Mearsheimers, some of the greatest academic minds and some of the best military minds in America are saying this. It's not just me or APAC assistants. It's people that aren't biased, people that haven't been programmed by their government or by their own limited ability to see both sides of the fence and analyse. So we really are in a scenario now where countries like Iran, Syria, all the BRICS countries, but the other 100 that have enlisted their desire to be involved in BRICS boils back down to, if you have a position of dominant power and don't act in accordance with the desires and needs of everybody, but act in a narcissistic way, your next superpower may not be a state, it may be a group of states. And so I think America has to not only think about its position as a dominant power, it needs to get back to thinking about its own core values and the reality of who it is and the realistic and realism of who it is, as opposed to who certain power players in America think it is and what their interests are based on. Raga, your comments are very useful. Dr. Ramu, do you have any closing comments?
Yes, Paul. So the primary agenda of the discussion is to understand the implications that such an emerging reset of the US dollar can have on Western businesses in particular. I mean, maybe I can actually start with some of the aspects over here. Especially commodity exporters like China, Russia, and Saudi Arabia. These are countries that have long enjoyed a trade surplus because they have been banking on exports of industrial products, of raw materials, of processed commodities, and these countries especially hold record account surpluses. But unlike maybe 10 years back, they are investing lesser and lesser in US Treasury bonds. So instead
Yes.
of US Treasury bonds, yes, Paul, I mean, would you like to pitch in over here?
No, I'm just saying yes, mate. Go on.
All right, okay. So they're investing more in gold and other solid assets like sovereign wealth funds, which are not linked with a US dollar, so that they don't need to replenish their dollar reserves for future trade with like-minded countries that are intent on trading in local currencies. So when a Western business wants to invest in a country that is more or less adversarial with US interests, it needs to factor in a lot of risk that can actually be associated with its operational portfolios in these countries. Western businesses may need to seek financing in local currencies, or even for that matter, recalibrate their capital structure to reduce currency risk. De-dollarization presents manifold challenges in terms of exchange rate risk, transaction costs, market volatility, and complex financial reporting. Uh, so in this context, these businesses will need to comply with changing regulations and restrictions that de-dollarizing countries may introduce. Raga, would you like to pitch in? Would you have any points to add on to this debate?
Right, Ramos. So there are some legal complexities when we're looking at that kind of environment. So businesses will have to kind of speak to and consult with their legal teams to kind of look at a long-term view on how to navigate a complex reporting system. There will be complex new regulations and restrictions because of these de-dollarization process, which some countries may introduce. So yeah, that sums my thoughts.
Yeah, I want to jump in there too. Look, obviously, the regulatory top-down compliance systems that America and the Western countries thrusting down on all countries, combined with the issues you've just discussed, adds a lot of complexities to compliance, because you're potentially multinationals are going to be compliant to global, but their localized compliances are going to become increasingly complex. I think that's also going to create, as the local currencies are used, there's also going to be more pressures to use or increase the local partnership content and a series of other complexities. I think we need to continue to monitor this really closely. I think there's also a tipping point to, at the moment, we've had over the last couple of years an inversion of the bonds. For those non-economic security listeners, what does that mean? It means that the return on long-term bond investments is less than the short term, which means it's a parity, because the longer you give money to somebody, the higher your return should be. When you have an inversion, it means nobody wants to do long-term investments because they're getting a better return on the short-term investments. So it has all kinds of budgetary and planning impacts, and it's a very unhealthy thing. America's in a situation where, when a drama is created by chance or by them globally, then they have an influx of funds. And if you look at, I can't remember the American debt levels off the top of my head. Rugger, would you happen to know the government's debt levels in the States off the top of your head? But by having massive inflows to what is perceived to be the safe currency, it actually shields the mismanagement by America. And it means that they can continue to play world's ombudsman / bully, depending on whose eyes you're looking through. And they can continue to mask the fact that they can't just get some simple political stability and have a House Speaker appointed, that they have to every quarter wrangle over paying the country. So you've got this paradox of this massively powerful nuclear power, the largest, most powerful, and there's no doubt about it, America has total security hegemonic force in that it can project power on the other side of the world, but politically doesn't know how to use that force. It doesn't know how to put troops on the ground and hold land, doesn't know how to convince its own country that they should be there for war. So it can actually project a force. People very much question now its ability to, without using nuclear weapons and without getting on the ground and getting away from the flashy use of drones and aircraft and ship-based missiles, can you actually really win a battle on the ground? And I mean, we don't want to give examples here and now where there's many examples that make that a very, very strong debate and a difficult one to win from. And America can do everything after it projects perspective. But the fact that America is able to manipulate situations to patch up their country is all good. But a spin-off of the combination of conflicts abroad, an overpowerful, misdirected USA neocon movement, a push by the growth of BRICS and the growth of other China think tanks and groups means that American businesses in particular are going to have to, and Western aligned businesses are going to have to address their core values, because the realities have changed. And if you don't change your values and beliefs, it's going to distort your ability to be agile enough to manage these emerging business challenges. Back to you, Ramu.
Thank you, Paul. So I guess we can all agree that increasingly number of nations these days are able to call the bluff on the US's so-called flawed, deficit financing model. Because the United States, for that matter, for the last nearly 50 years, enjoyed a sort of a financing model wherein the US Federal Reserve was able to print dollar notes without having a proper collateral and create a sort of an artificial demand for US dollars in the global system. And this is what we very tongue-in-cheekly we call as the petrodollar system, wherein any country that indulges in the trade and transaction in oil needs to pay in US dollars. And oil, regardless of all the debates towards diversifying away from the dependence on fossil fuels, is still the largest traded commodity in the world, which kind of creates this artificial scarcity for the US dollar. In this scenario, Western businesses should be wary of the evolving economic conditions. It has to optimize technologies such as artificial intelligence, machine learning, or data analytics to streamline and improve compliance processes, monitor for regulatory changes, and ensure that financial institutions meet changing legal and regulatory standards more effectively. As de-dollarization is increasingly driven by geopolitical factors, Western businesses will need to prepare for potential disruptions to their operations. With this, I conclude this very wonderful and scintillating discussions. Thank you, Paul and Raga.